Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a little while. This is a channel where we talk about photography, about videography, and about sort of the freelance world, and specifically those things as they relate to the Nikon Z camera system. So if you're into any of that stuff, if you're a Nikon Z camera owner, welcome to the channel. Feel free to hit that subscribe button if you would like to. Today's video is going to be focused on this guy right here. This is the Nikon 24 to 70 millimeter 2.8S lens for that Nikon Z camera system. And specifically, the big question, has it replaced my prime lenses in my workflow? And sort of where does it fit in my camera bag in relation to those prime lenses? So let's hop into that. And so I'm going to begin this video with a little bit of a disclosure. Nikon Canada did send me this lens. They do not have creative control over this review, this video. No money changed hands, but I do get to keep the lens afterwards. So thanks to Nikon for that, for sending it out. But yeah, just so that's out of the way up front. And so I'm going to begin this video talking a little bit about prime lenses before I hop into the subject of the day about this guy. If you've been following this channel or you follow my Instagram or anything like that, you know for the most part, I have built most of my business off these two prime lenses right here. This is the 35mm 1.8S, and this is an old 85mm 1.8G. Up until about 3 months ago, I would have said, this is all you need. Prime lenses are the way. You know, you don't need anything else. And really, my love of prime lenses comes down to two main reasons. The first being that you just get a lot more lens for your dollar in the prime lens world. I think most people know that you can get a beautiful 1.8 piece of glass for a fraction of the price of something like a zoom lens. You know, even if you added up the dollar value of these two lenses and something like a 24mm or a 20mm, something that covers the focal length of the zoom lens, it's oftentimes less money total than if you just bought this. So really, it does feel like the prime lenses, in terms of like quality to dollar, are actually a better decision. And I really do think that's true. And number two, outside of the value piece, I actually like the way prime lenses sort of force me to be creative in my workflow. I find that I often have to work around my environment a lot more because I'm kind of looking for reframes, or I'm looking for sort of like existing elements to work around rather than just sort of like, you know, zooming in and out. And I feel like there's just a bit more of a creative workflow inside of these prime lenses than in something like a zoom lens. Okay, so that's prime lenses. That's the argument for prime lenses. Let's kind of shift our focus to this guy right here, the reason we're here today. So it's important for me to acknowledge that, you know, about 6 months ago, I sort of pivoted my whole business away from being just a photographer into doing freelance video and photography work in the sort of corporate and commercial world. Oftentimes, I actually do both at the same job. I'm hired to do sort of photo stills for the day, as well as create like a short video highlight. I'd love to create another video about sort of that approach with clients and the value I think they get out of that. But just know that that's sort of going on in the background, that I have created this sort of hybrid work model that isn't just stills, it isn't just video. It's often needing to do both at the same time inside of the same camera. So keep that part in mind. And so with that part said, you know, that prime philosophy, that creative workflow piece that comes out of the primes is more true in photos than it is true in video. And a lot of that is strictly like an ergonomics thing. Because your camera is often rigged up with a lot more gear, you have like a mic, it might be on a gimbal, you have a cage on it, all those things. Flipping between lenses can be a little bit harder and take a bit more time. And that's hard on your client and that's hard on yourself as well. And so you almost sort of hunger for a bit more flexibility in your lenses. And that's why I think as I've transitioned into more video work, I find myself also falling away from my prime lenses and more toward flexible zoom lenses. And so yeah, over the last few months of using this lens, that suspicion has actually proven to be completely true. I find that my work is a lot more dynamic because of this lens, because I'm not like sort of stressing, be like, geez, if I go run over in my camera bag, pull the 35 off, put the 85 on, then suddenly I'm trapped on the 85. So I might as well just stick with the 35 you know, you end up in this sort of like brain workflow fog as a result of that indecision. Versus when I have this on, I can kind of just reframe without having to like worry about rebalancing my gimbal or taking it out of the cage to put the lens back on, that kind of thing. So I would say overall, as a summary, my work has become a bit more dynamic and a lot more flexible as a result of just owning this lens and having it on my camera most of the time. So let's talk about some comparisons. I wasn't really sure how to organize this video, and I think the best way to do it would be to just sort of pick a few topics that I would have been curious about before buying, and sort of walk you guys through the decisions or some of the thoughts that I had in relation to sort of this comparison here of primes and zoom lenses. So the first one, and the most obvious one, is the 1.8 versus the 2.8 aperture that you sort of have to decide between. And what I mean by that is prime lenses, for the most part, are either a 1.4 or a 1.8. Specifically, the ones I use are 1.8s, versus most zoom lenses, the Pro Series ones like this one, are 2.8. So you're losing an entire f-stop of aperture, and with that comes worse low light performance and not as like creamy and smooth bokeh. And so the question then is that worth it? Is that trade-off of having, you know, 2 or 3 lenses built into one lens worth that trade-off of f-stop? And to be completely blunt about it, yeah, it totally is. I don't mean to be dismissive of sort of that like, ooh, that extra bit of bokeh or that low light performance, but I have never sort of felt myself longing for that extra stop in either the bokeh or the low light situations. And I think a lot of that, to be honest, is because the low light performance on the Z series cameras is so good. I don't think I've ever really had to push the ISO to a point where it's broken the footage, and I'm sometimes shooting at 3200, 6400 ISO. And so that extra stop has never really been something that I'm like, oh man, I really need this right now. 2.8 for the work that I'm doing, which is mostly weddings, commercial, corporate events, it totally suffices. The extra light that I would get out of that 1.8 rarely is anything that I need. And then when it comes to bokeh, again, not to be dismissive, I do think there is a difference between 1.8 and 2.8. I would say that it's less noticeable than maybe a lot of people would think it is. In the stills photography world especially, there's great AI programs like Luminar that can actually probably get you from here to here in the software elements without even needing that more expensive piece of glass. So keep that in mind. If you're just shooting stills, there's actually like software that will get you that extra range. And in video, again, I don't think most people notice. And I would say shooting video at 1.8 is a dicey enough prospect because you have such a thin little focal, area of focus that I don't know if it's even worth it going to that. I often find myself shooting video at 2.8 plus even when I'm on my primes. So I know that there is a bit of a trade-off, but lately, if you were to actually go into the metadata of most of the footage I'm shooting, it's 2.8, 3.2 and up, just to give myself some more safety in that, that focal range. So yeah, to summarize that, I know this is kind of a hot take, but I don't think the 1.8 versus the 2.8 is really as big of a difference as some people make it out to be. I know there's some wide open stands in the comments who are going to come after me for that, but I would encourage you to look at some sample images, shot at 1.8, shot at 2.8. Maybe we can do a video about that. It's not the big difference you probably think it is. So the next topic that I want to talk about is the weight of the lenses. And that's probably up there with the sort of aperture one that we just talked about as sort of one of the big deal breakers for folks as they consider the prime lens versus the zoom lens debate. And I'll be totally honest with you, this lens is really heavy. I think it weighs in at about 850 grams, somewhere around there, versus something like the 35mm 1.8. I think this thing is 200 grams or 250 grams, somewhere in there. And you feel that, like, on a day of shooting, especially if you've got it rigged up on a gimbal, or if you have it in a cage with a bunch of other things as well, like at the end of the day, you feel the difference between these two lenses. And you can mitigate some of that. I think like having a cage with a 2 contact point, you know, having like a handle on the side and having a better grip on this side, you can kind of square yourself up on that extra weight a little bit and it's not as noticeable. New gimbals that are coming out, like the Zion Weeble 2, which I have, has kind of a 2-handle system as well. And so I think you can kind of mitigate some of that extra weight with the ergonomics of other parts of your camera. but it's still noticeable. And I would say if you're someone who is really concerned about the weight difference, that could be your deal breaker, I think. For me, a lot of the work that I do is kind of stop, go, stop, go. So there are some breaks. There's oftentimes when it's on a tripod, or I can put it down for a little bit of time while we set up the next shot or something like that. So the weight doesn't totally deal break it for me in the kind of work that I do. But I would totally understand if that's someone's concern, because it is significant. A little piece I'll also add is that, like, if you're traveling, if you're planning on having this thing on your camera on a side strap or something all day, that's probably not the best lens for you. I would say you should consider a prime lens, or you should consider even the f4 version of this lens to get some of that weight off your back. Because again, this thing is really heavy. It is a beast. That isn't a deal breaker for me personally, but it is something I think about. Like, if I know that I'm on a job that I am going to be holding my gimbal all day, or I'm going to be like rigged up hiking up a mountain or something like that, I will kind of stand over my camera bag for a few extra minutes and be like,
can I get away with the 35? Can I?
And sometimes I do make that call, and it's one of the reasons why I still probably will keep some of my prime lenses. So the last one I'll talk about, and probably one of the most important ones, is the image quality. None of this matters if the lens sucks, right? Like, doesn't matter how heavy it is, doesn't matter if you get an extra bit of, you know, focal range or aperture out of it. If the image sucks, none of it matters. What I will say is that this lens is insane. It is my favorite lens out of the Nikon Z camera system in terms of color, in terms of its autofocus, all of the elements that I normally care about in a lens. This lens absolutely excels at all of them. And I have never paused or had a concern or felt like the reason I lost an image or lost some footage is because this lens wasn't performing. That's always my fault when I have this lens on the camera. I never find myself fighting it. There are more technical reviews of this lens on YouTube, so I encourage you to go look for some of those if you're looking to see sort of a Ricky Talk style edge-to-edge sharpness comparison. The thing that I will say about it is that I've probably delivered, you know, 10 to 15 different projects shooting on this lens to commercial clients. I trust it, it's reliable, and like I said, it has never given me pause when I go to grab it to use it for a job. It is an excellent lens. So image quality, it is on par or exceeds my normal prime lens image quality. And so that kind of leads us to the summary. The sort of big question is, does this lens replace these lenses in my camera bag? Or am I keeping them? Like, where am I at in that decision? I hate this answer. I know you probably came here looking for like a definitive answer, but I can't give you one. It kind of depends. What I will say is that for about 75 to 85% of the work that I do, this lens is all I need. I don't even bring these lenses to jobs anymore. My camera bag is literally my Z6 II and this lens, for the most part. However, there are situations I get into that I do like having the prime lenses. Like I said, situations where I want the lighter lens for my body if I know it's going to be a long day, if I know I can get away with just a prime when I'm traveling, or if I am in a situation where I do want that sort of more artsy 1.8 bokeh look, I will still grab these. And so for you, you know, if you're watching this video being like, well, Darren, just tell me, do I need it? Like, what should I do? I would say cost it out. Really think hard about your workflow, how much the money matters versus how much the flexibility matters. I would say that's kind of what your sliding scale is. If you're just curious about the quality, if you're like, does this thing hold the quality of the beautiful 1.8 prime lenses? Stamped and sealed, yes. 100% you will not be disappointed by the quality of the 24-70 2.8S. But if you're on a budget and you think you can kind of get away with a prime, I would say the difference is not so much worth it. If you are not someone who needs that flexibility all in one lens, but you have the ability to swap between lenses or carry a backpack around with you for the day, go with this, don't go with that. I hope that answers some of the questions. If you guys do have more questions, if you're curious about this lens or how it relates to my sort of prime versus zoom lens workflow, let me know down below. I usually hang out in the comments forever because I usually get, 10 of them. Yeah, I think that's it. Awesome, cool, great, lovely. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Try to be doing more of these in the future. So like I said, hit that subscribe button if you made it this far. And yeah, thanks so much.